Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We will just give it a few seconds more for people to join us in. All right, I guess we can start. So, everyone, thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Happy Reyno. I'm the Executive Director of BC Bereavement Helpline. And I would like to begin by acknowledging that BC Bereavement Helpline is located in New Westminster on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Kikite First Nation. We recognize and respect their enduring connection to this land and community, and we honor their ongoing presence, strength, and stewardship. I would like to invite you all in the chat to share with us the Indigenous lands from which you're joining us from. Just want to test. You guys can hear me okay, right? Okay, I see nods. Thank you so much. For those of you joining us for the first time, BC Bereavement Helpline is a registered nonprofit supporting anyone experiencing grief and loss across British Columbia. So we do offer our free helpline support that is open from Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And we do offer support groups for traumatic losses, including suicide, homicide, toxic drug poisoning, and pet loss. We do also provide private grief trainings and public webinars such as this one. Before we begin, I would like to just invite you all to take a moment to honor the victims of the Tumbler Ridge tragedy. I appreciate us holding that moment together. BC Bereavement Helpline will continue our support by extending our dedicated helpline this Saturday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And we're grateful for the Community Action Initiative for their support in making this possible. As we move into tonight's session, I'd like to share a few quick notes. The session will be focusing on grief, and this is being recorded. So for those of you who are not comfortable being in camera, please feel free to keep your camera off for privacy. We'll open the floor for questions at the end as time permits, and you're welcome to add questions in the chat throughout the session. We will be sharing short feedback form afterward, and I would like to invite you all to share your inputs with us so that we can improve and shape future topics that are meaningful to you. And allow me to introduce our speaker for tonight. I'm really happy to introduce our speaker, Ryan Murphy. Ryan has been with BC Bereavement Helpline since 2023, supporting individuals impacted by suicide and homicide loss. He brings several years of experience facilitating support groups for people living with addictive behaviors and for those grieving losses related to medical assistance in dying or MAiD. Ryan holds a Master of Human Rights and a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and Sociology, along with certificates in crisis intervention, trauma support, and thanatology, which is the study of death and dying. He has volunteered for more than 20 years with over 30 organizations focused on mental health, human rights, and international development. Ryan is known for creating a calm, open, and supportive space central to his approach. Ryan, we're so glad that you're here with us tonight. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Happy, for that introduction. And welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here on a Thursday evening. Today's session focuses on understanding grief related to medical assistance in dying, or MAiD. MAiD-related grief can be layered, complex, and shaped by many factors. Hopefully, this session will provide you clarity, validation, and reassurance for those navigating this experience, either personally or professionally. I want to share that I am presenting virtually from Victoria today. I live, work, and grieve on the unceded Coast Salish territories of the Lekwungen peoples, known today as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. Grief and end-of-life care are deeply connected to land, culture, and community. Acknowledging territory reminds us that loss is experienced within broader historical and relational contexts. Happy's already mentioned, but if you'd like to, please feel free to share where you are joining us from today in the chat if you haven't done so already. So the following disclaimer is important as we move through the session today. British Columbia Bereavement Helpline does not advocate for or promote MAiD. Our role is to provide grief and loss support for anyone across BC. This session is educational and supportive in nature. We recognize that participants may hold diverse beliefs about MAiD, and our focus today is on understanding grief, not debating policy or eligibility, and we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. Here's our outline for what to expect in this session. We'll review safety guidelines, explore an overview of MAiD-related grief, talk about some types of grief that might show up, discuss factors that can shape the experience, look at safe language in Canada, and end with questions and resources. The structure for this session is intentional. We begin with safety, move through understanding, and end with support. So safety and webinar guidelines. This session includes mention of death, MAiD, and suicide. Please care for yourself as we move through the session this evening. You're welcome to step away at any time. There will be some time for participation throughout today's webinar, but just a reminder that participation is optional. Listening is enough. We'll have time for questions, clarifications, and reflections at the end. And our shared commitment is respect and compassion as we move through this evening. We speak from our own experiences and allow space for others to hold different perspectives. This is not a crisis service, so if you're in immediate distress, please reach out to emergency or crisis supports. So what this webinar is and what this webinar is not. So this webinar is grief-focused, informational, and supportive. It is not a debate space. It's not a legal or medical advice space. It does not determine eligibility. The purpose is to provide a space for understanding, and today is all about discussion, support, and education. So to get us started, I wanted to talk a little bit of an overview of MAiD-related grief. So MAiD-related grief often begins before the death. Long-term illness can bring anticipatory grief, which we'll touch on shortly, and cumulative losses of function, identity, roles, and future plans. For many individuals, anticipatory grief may occur prior to even considering MAiD. During the MAiD journey, emotions may intensify. Conversations about eligibility, planning, and preparing for the death can bring love, relief, doubt, fear, sometimes all at once. After the provision, grief continues, meaning-making begins. People may feel peace, guilt, questioning, or gratitude. Often these emotions coexist as well. MAiD-related grief is rarely about a single moment. It is layered and shaped by medical, relational, spiritual, and social contexts. As we move into this next section, I want to emphasize that the types of grief we'll discuss are possibilities, not predictions. These are grief responses that can show up in MAiD-related loss, but they're not guaranteed, and not everyone will experience them. Grief is highly individual. Two people in the same family may experience very different emotional responses. These categories are not labels to place on yourself or others. Instead, they're lenses, ways of understanding some of the emotional dynamics that may arise. The purpose of naming these types is to normalize them. When we have language for our experiences, it can reduce isolation and help us feel less alone in what we're navigated. So starting off with anticipatory grief. So anticipatory grief is the experience of mourning someone who is still alive. It often emerges when death is expected, whether due to illness, decline, or a planned end-of-life pathway such as MAiD. Unlike grief after death, anticipatory grief unfolds alongside ongoing caregiving, conversations, and daily life. People may find themselves grieving future milestones that will not be shared, birthdays, graduations, even ordinary routines. There can be a quiet awareness that life is already changing. Many individuals describe living in two emotional realities at once. They may feel gratitude for the time that remains while simultaneously grieving its anticipated end. They may try to stay strong for the person who's dying, sometimes setting aside their own emotions to focus on practical tasks or meaningful moments. Anticipatory grief can also involve protective behaviors. People may emotionally brace themselves, limit how far ahead they think, or attempt to prepare for the loss. Importantly, anticipatory grief does not reduce or replace grief after the death. It is not getting it over with. Instead, it reflects the depth of attachment and the human capacity to begin mourning change even before it fully arrives. Recognizing anticipatory grief allows us to validate that grieving can begin early and that this too is a natural and meaningful response to love. Ambiguous grief refers to grief that feels unresolved, unclear, or difficult to define. It often arises when the emotional experience does not neatly match expectations, either our own or others. In MAiD-related contexts, ambiguity can show up in subtle but powerful ways. A person may feel relief that suffering has ended, yet still experience deep sadness. They may have supported the decision, yet find themselves questioning it afterward. They may feel at peace one day and unsettled the next. The grief does not follow a clean narrative. Ambiguity can also emerge socially. So when others assume that a planned death should feel easier, the bereaved person may struggle privately with emotions that don't align with that assumption. This mismatch can create internal confusion. Why do I feel this way if I thought I was prepared? As an example. Another layer of ambiguity involves identity and roles. The caregiving role may end abruptly. Daily routines shift overnight. There can be a strange stillness after a period of intense preparation and activity. Some describe feeling unmoored, unsure of where to place their energy or how to integrate the experience. Ambiguous grief does not mean something is wrong. It reflects the complexity of human attachment. When love, agency, timing, and mortality intersect, emotions rarely fit into one category. Naming ambiguity can be relieving. It gives permission for grief to be complicated and still entirely valid. Complicated grief refers to a grief response that remains intense, prolonged, and disruptive over time. While grief naturally ebbs and flows, complicated grief can feel persistent, as though the loss has not been emotionally integrated into the person's life. In the context of MAiD-related loss, complicated grief may be influenced by unresolved conflict, moral distress, secrecy, or lack of social support. A person might find themselves repeatedly replaying conversations, decisions, or the final moments. There may be strong what if thinking that does not soften with time. Some individuals describe feeling stuck, unable to re-engage with meaningful activities, relationships, or future planning. The longing for the person may feel constant and consuming, while others may avoid reminders of the death altogether, finding that even small cues trigger intense emotional reactions. It's important to emphasize that complicated grief is not about weakness or failure. It reflects how deeply attachment, context, and meaning intersect. When grief is unsupported, stigmatized, or internally conflicted, it may take longer to settle. Disenfranchised grief occurs when a person's loss is not fully recognized, validated, or supported by others. The grief may feel invisible either because of the circumstances of the death, the relationship to the person who died, or social discomfort surrounding the topic. In MAiD-related contexts, disenfranchised grief can arise when others avoid the subject, change the story, or respond with judgment. Someone might feel unable to share openly about how their loved one died. They may edit details, anticipate criticism, or choose silence to protect themselves or their family. This can create a secondary layer of pain. So, in addition to grieving the death itself, the person may grieve the absence of understanding. When grief is not witnessed, it can feel isolating and lonely. Disenfranchisement can also occur internally. So a person might tell themselves they shouldn't feel devastated because the death was planned or because suffering ended. They may minimize their own pain. Naming disenfranchised grief helps restore legitimacy. It affirms that all grief, regardless of circumstance, deserves acknowledgement. Supportive listening, safe spaces for sharing, and language that validates the complexity of the loss can help counter the effects of silence and stigma. So, things to remember about grief. These are some important notes. Grief is not linear. It does not move in predictable stages. It shifts and evolves over time. There's no correct timeline and no correct emotional response. Grief may resurface during anniversaries, milestones, or unexpected moments. The words on this slide and on the signs in the image, layered, nonlinear, unique, personal, valid, are reminders of this. In short, our grief experience is allowed to look the way that it looks. Okay, next, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into factors impacting MAiD-related grief. So these factors that can influence how MAiD-related grief is experienced and there's 10 factors here. They're not a comprehensive list. Other factors exist outside of what I'm about to share. For me, some of these are some of the most common ones that pop up with MAiD-related grief. But I also want to share that they're not right or wrong categories. They exist on continuums, which I'll talk about as we move through this. And these factors help us understand why grief responses may vary so widely between individuals and families. So first, I want to start with knowledge and understanding. So in the following slide series, you'll see these sliders or continuums under the headings. So on the left side here, we have fully informed about MAiD process, and on the other, we have limited or inaccurate understanding. Knowledge and understanding can significantly shape how someone experiences MAiD-related grief. When individuals feel well informed about the process, what eligibility involves, what to expect medically, and what safeguards are in place, they may experience a greater sense of predictability or control. When understanding is limited or shaped by misinformation, distress can increase. For example, imagine someone whose father chose MAiD. They avoid learning details about the procedure because it felt overwhelming. After his death, they find themselves replaying uncertainties, wondering what his final moments were like. The unanswered questions intensified their grief. Support here may involve gently checking understanding, pacing information, and correcting myths without overwhelming people. Information does not eliminate grief, but clarity can reduce unnecessary distress layered on top of it. So, anticipation of death. MAiD often includes a known or anticipated date. This can create what some describe as a countdown. So the last birthday, the last week, the last shared meal, the last day, the last conversation. Imagine someone described the weeks before their partner's MAiD provision as emotionally exhausting. Each moment felt heavy with meaning. They felt both grateful for the chance to say goodbye and anxious watching the days pass. This anticipation can intensify anticipatory grief, which we talked about earlier, emotional numbing, or heightened anxiety. It can also create opportunities for meaningful connection and legacy conversations as well. Support in this area might involve normalizing anticipatory grief and helping people hold mixed emotions such as relief, sadness, love, and fear. Alignment with decision. Once again, this factor is particular to MAiD. So alignment with the MAiD decision exists on a continuum. Some family members or friends feel supportive, others feel conflicted or opposed. Many experience both. So let's think about someone who's supported their mother's decision publicly, but privately struggled with guilt, wondering if they should have tried harder to encourage alternative treatments. They felt relief that their mother's suffering ended and guilt for feeling that relief. This tension can influence moral distress, family disagreement, and long-term meaning making. Support here could look like listening without judgment, validating ambivalence, and allowing space for complex emotions without trying to resolve them. Family system. So every family has its own communication style, history, and relational patterns. MAiD can magnify existing strengths or fractures. For example, in someone's family, siblings disagreed about the decision. One attended the provision, another refused. After the death, grief became entangled with unresolved conflict. Family systems influence caregiving roles, decision dynamics, and shared grief experiences. Support may include encouraging dialogue, validating different perspectives, and helping families focus on relationships rather than positions. Geography and accessibility. This one I could talk probably an entire hour for, but I've shrunk it down just to one slide. Where someone lives can deeply shape their MAiD experience. Urban settings may offer more access to providers and support services, while rural or remote communities may require travel and create logistical stress. It's important to note, though, that accessibility does not always have to be connected with location. Imagine someone lived in a rural community and had to travel several hours for appointments. Coordinating transportation and time off work added stress to an already emotional period. Geography can influence who is able to be present, how support is accessed, and whether the experience feels connected or isolating. Possible support in this area involves normalizing logistical stress and offering flexible or virtual resources when possible. Sometimes that's not possible. It's also important to note that policies and procedures may vary depending on where you live. So provinces and territories can create health-related laws or rules that may affect medical assistance and dying services. So once again, I could speak probably a whole hour about that, but I'll leave it there. Presence at death. So being present or not present at the time of the MAiD provision can be meaningful and emotionally intense. So some people feel grateful to have been there, others feel overwhelmed by the memory. Some are not present due to distance, conflict, or personal choice. And as an example of this factor, there could be a situation where someone chose to be in the room with their sister. They treasured holding her hand, but also they replay the moment frequently in their mind. Presence can influence closure, emotional intensity, and family bonding. Support may include preparing individuals for what to expect and offering opportunities to process the experience afterwards. Emotional experience. So, MAiD-related to grief often includes layered and sometimes contradictory emotions. Relief and guilt can coexist. Peace and distress can coexist. Let's take, for example, someone who can feel profound relief that their husband's suffering ended, but question whether that relief meant they didn't love him enough. They worried something was wrong with their grief. Ambiguous grief and complicated grief, which we spoke about earlier on, may emerge, particularly when emotions feel unresolved or socially unsupported. Support with this particular factor might focus on normalizing mixed emotions, encouraging self-compassion, and reinforcing that there is no single correct way to grieve. So, religious and spiritual framework. Spiritual or religious beliefs can strongly shape how MAiD is understood. Some faith traditions affirm autonomy and relief of suffering. Others experience moral or theological tension. Let's say someone found comfort in their belief that suffering had ended. Their cousin, however, struggled deeply believing the decision conflicted with their shared faith. Spiritual frameworks influence meaning making, ritual needs, and experiences of peace or guilt. Support in this with this factor might include respectfully exploring beliefs and making space for tension without trying to resolve it. Grief recognition. Not all grief is publicly acknowledged. MAiD-related deaths can sometimes lead to secrecy, stigma, or hidden grief. For example, take the situation where someone did not tell extended family that their brother chose MAiD. They felt they had to protect the family from judgment. As a result, they grieved quietly and alone. When grief is disenfranchised, isolation can increase. Support might include encouraging safe spaces for sharing, educating about hidden grief, and affirming that their loss deserves recognition. Social response. Community response can significantly impact grief. Supportive reactions may ease isolation. Stigmatizing or judgmental responses can intensify distress. Say someone received compassionate messages from friends, which helped them feel supported. However, a coworker made a dismissive comment about MAiD, leaving them feeling defensive and alone. Social response influences whether someone feels safe to speak about their loss. Support in this area might include addressing stigma openly, encouraging connection with understanding communities, and validating diverse reactions. So, as we've just gone through with the factors, MAiD-related grief is rarely influenced by just one factor. It's shaped by intersecting layers, personal beliefs, family dynamics, timing, knowledge, community response, emotional experience, and much more. Two people may experience the same death and move through entirely different grief journeys because their layers are different. One may feel spiritually at peace, but socially isolated. Another may feel supported by family, but internally conflicted. Someone may have felt prepared before the death, yet overwhelmed afterward. These layers interact, sometimes reinforcing one another, sometimes pulling in opposite directions. Grief in this context can be complex, not because something is wrong, but because the circumstances themselves are complex. Choice, illness, autonomy, suffering, love, timing, and social perception all converge in one experience. When we recognize these layers, we move away from asking, is this the right way to grieve? And instead ask, What factors might be shaping this experience? That shift allows for compassion for ourselves and for others. So, safe language and made in Canada. Language matters, and in Canada, the legal term is medical assistance in dying or MAiD. It includes both physicians and practitioners within the term. More casual phrases that are acceptable and that you may have heard are assisted dying or medically assisted death. We avoid assisted suicide when referring to MAiD because they are distinct under Canadian law. When speaking about suicide separately, we use died by suicide and not committed suicide. I could also speak a very long time about safe language and suicide, but just wanted to touch on it here. We also generally avoid euthanasia in Canadian public education settings because it is not the legislative term and can carry some historical associations with it as well. I do want to make a point that it's important to recognize that people may use different words based on their own beliefs, cultural background, or personal experience. Some may speak from a place of support, others may speak from discomfort, uncertainty, or pain. In a grief space, our role is not to correct with criticism, but to approach with curiosity and education. We can gently model accurate terminology while also acknowledging that how someone describes their experience reflects how they are making sense of it. Their perception of their MAiD-related loss, whether it includes relief, conflict, gratitude, anger, or spiritual struggle, is valid. Safe language is not about controlling conversation, it's about reducing harm, minimizing stigma, and creating a space where people feel respected, heard, and not judged. Using clear, accurate, non-stigmatizing language reduces harm and supports respectful conversation. Okay, so we're going to walk through a couple of these together. That's a lot of talking from me. So now I'm going to open this up a little bit for whoever would like to participate. Um, so we're going to do an instead of and try this um, bit of an exercise together. So what's interesting about this first one, at least they're no longer suffering, that might be a very comforting thing for some to hear, but for others it might not feel that way. So in the chat, we'll use the chat function for this. I'm wondering if you have any ideas of what you might say instead of at least they're no longer suffering. And I'll monitor the chat and see what responses come out. So at least they're no longer suffering. May they be at peace. They are at peace. So removing that at least. Sorry for your loss. That your choice was honored. I'm glad they had a choice. She died with agency. Just another minute or two for any other thoughts on this one. Another, I'm sorry for your loss. Okay. So one here that I've wrote down is, I imagine this might bring up any emotions. What has this experience been like for you? I hope it felt peaceful. I see there in the chat as well. So the next one that I have is, you knew this was coming. Any thoughts on instead of you knew this was coming, what could you say instead? I'm here for you if you need me. Yeah. Can't imagine what this was like for you. It must be difficult to prepare for this. Tell me how that makes you feel. Was it difficult for you to know that this was coming? I imagine this has been a long, difficult process for you. How did it feel planning for this? So, some open ended questions. I'm here if you want to talk. Loss is never easy. How do you feel that it's been a few months? Do you want to talk about how it has been for you? Once again, another question there and offering. So, one that I have here is even when a death is anticipated, it can still feel overwhelming or shocking. How has it been for you since? A couple of you, I think, were very close to that question that I left there as well. So, the next one that I have here is you supported their choice, so you must feel at peace. Any thoughts of instead of you supported their choice, so you must feel at peace? What might you be able to say instead? How was it for you to support their choice? Excellent. Yeah. Any other thoughts on this one? This has been a complex process. How does it feel for you now? Yeah. You stood by their choice, so I imagine you feel settled about it. It was very caring of you to support them. You probably have many different feelings about their death. Yeah. How have you been since? These are never easy decisions. I knew there would be a lot of good answers in this group. I hope you were able to feel some relief as you respected their choice and supported their journey. This sounds like a significant loss. How are you doing? I'm here for you if you want to talk. Your support was so important for your loved one. What can I do to support you now? Lovely. So I've put down supporting someone's decision and grieving them deeply can exist at the same time. What feels most present for you right now? I'm grateful they had you for your support. Want to go for a walk? Yeah, great. Just a couple more. You were lucky to be there. What do you think could be some instead of you were lucky to be there? What could you say instead? It's hard to say goodbye. Mm-hmm. How was it for you to be there? Yep. So taking that statement, reframing it into a question. Did you feel honored to be there? Your presence must have taken a great deal of strength. Yeah, absolutely. How was your experience being there? Once again, a good reframing of that statement. How do you feel about being part of the journey with dot dot dot? Insert their name. It was kind to be there at a last moment. Being with your loved one was a beautiful gift for them. How are you managing now? You chose to be there. Would you like to talk more in depth about your experience? Would this help? Yeah. It's special that you got to be there on their final journey. How did it feel to be a part of your loved one's choice? Great. So I had wrote, being present can bring up different emotions. What has stayed with you since that day? And then the last one that I have here is, instead of minimizing spiritual or cultural conflict, what might you say instead? What might you do? Any thoughts on this one? Has this changed how you look at life? Yeah, excellent. I understand that spiritually this may be challenging for you. It was the right decision for you and you. How has this experience been for you spiritually and culturally? In what ways has your own personal belief system been a support to you? It's important to feel free to practice and talk about your own spiritual experience. I understand you're conflicted, but understand it was his or her choice. Acknowledging spiritual or cultural conflicts. Your loved one made their choice for them, and it was so kind of you to honor that despite possibly your differences. How is your heart now? I am mindful of different traditions and beliefs. Every sunset is a different experience. Navigating this is complex within our culture and spiritually. What can we do to support you through this? How did this process impact your cultural or spiritual beliefs? Great. And so I put here, how does this experience fit or not fit with your beliefs, values, or cultural background? Okay, thank you for those of you who wanted to participate in that activity. It's great. So, in closing this part, I wanted to leave you with this framework from Yan and colleagues who describe MAiD-related grief as unfolding in preparation, end of life, and after effects. This metaphor of budding, flowering, and seeding reflects how grief grows, transforms, and continues. The leaves represent relationships, the roots represent distinct aspects of MAiD-related grief. This reminds us that grief does not begin at the death, it starts, shifts, and integrates over time. And with that, I have some resources at the end, but I'm happy to open it up for questions, reflections. You're welcome to share in whatever way feels safest or simply listen. Um, as a reminder, questions about legal or eligibility areas are out of scope, um, as today's focus remains on grief and support. There's no expectation to share personal details as well. So just wanted to open it up. You're welcome, Cordelia. Questions, clarifications, reflections. See, someone just drew a heart on the screen. That's nice. Thank you. Appreciate you too, Sherry. Thank you. In your experience with anniversary and/or trigger dates, what are the emotions you have seen? That's a great question. Um, Quite a variation. Um, I will say that when I think back, there's times where some people might feel a lot of apprehension or this need that they have to make something of some important dates that are approaching. So that sometimes happens. Um, Other times, though, it could be quite the opposite, where someone's just rolls in through the anniversary or dates and they move through it quite easily. So I know that's maybe not the best answer, but it's the truth. It varies quite from one end to the other. What has your experience been supporting those whose loved ones died by track two instead of track one? Hmm. I've mainly supported those who have been on track one. So track two, I can't really speak to that one. I see that there's a couple of questions about that. Okay. Curious if anyone here has had the experience directly with having someone they care about access MAiD. It's a question by Chris in the chat. Yeah, thank you, Alicia, for pointing that out as well. So, Alicia says, I think it's important to acknowledge that some of us may have lost a loved one when their end of life wasn't reasonably foreseeable. A lot of the comments felt geared towards end of life track one. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Do you feel that a grief support for MAiD be one on its own versus a general support group? So just to share a little bit, I've facilitated um, a lot of different relational loss MAiD support groups from parent, grandparent, sibling loss, friend loss. Um, and I do see a really big need for grief support groups specific for MAiD. Although I feel that way kind of about any form of loss, really, I think there's something to be said for having general groups, but then specific ones as well. But that's my own personal take. Yeah. So just I'm going to read out some of the comments here too. Personally, I find it changes on anniversary dates. Sometimes I isolate and don't want to eat, and other times I try celebrating them. Yeah. So it depends. Do you find How often do you find grief from a family member or confusion distress hits a year or longer after? Yeah, grief has no timeline, right? So these things can come up at different times. What is track one or track two? I'm going to provide some links, some resources you can check. The Government of Canada's website will give you an overview of MAiD and can provide you with that information. Please introduce John Dubé and get his input, is a comment. John, any thoughts?
Sorry, Ryan, on what? Like, I'm not sure what the question is. Does like comment on May, track one, track two?
It's a good question. It was just a general statement. I
I
don't know if anyone wants to clarify in the chat, maybe.
I think you're doing a very good job, so I don't need to speak.
I was like, wait, I know that name. Sure, I can call out John and see if John has any thoughts. You're welcome. Sylvia, sorry to hear of your loss. I had a friend do an online ceremony before her maid and supported her. You're welcome. Any other thoughts, feelings, questions?
Ryan, Sarah's hand is up.
Oh, Sarah. Sorry, I was busy looking at the chat on my other screen.
It's easier to talk than for me to type. So I thought I would just actually ask instead of type it. But I had the question about the track one or the track two. And I know that you said that you have dealt more with people going through track one, having a reasonably foreseeable natural death versus so track two. I'm just interested because people are they're just waiting, right? Like they have to wait like 90 days or something, right? A minimum of 90 days. So I would think that would just almost just be another layer on this, just another one of your layers on this kind of like multi-dimensional grief journey that people are like, now they have to, kind of stand in queue
Mm,
for, 3 months, right? And that can just complicate it even more.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And certainly depending on when the date as well of the provision is, for some people it's a very fast turnaround where they might keep it to themselves and share at a later time. And then others have a lot of advance notice. So I'm just connecting that to your point around, yeah, having wait times in different spheres, whether it's track one or track two, can add an additional layer for sure.
Yeah. And sorry, just not to hog the time here, but I have a friend whose mother she was approved for MAiD, and I think she was scheduled to have MAiD, but on the day there was nobody available to do the provision. So that's like this whole other complicated thing. She actually ended up dying not through MAiD, even though she wanted it and was on the list, but no one was available. And that's that's a whole other ball of wax too. So it's not even dying of MAiD, but it's kind of related to it. It's you know, another whole aspect of it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Just checking the chat again. Thank you, Tanya, for sharing. Okay. Um, Thank you all for your interactions, your questions, your comments. Thank you for being so respectful through our time together. I just wanted to share here's some resources. So on the left-hand side, these are everything about BC Bereavement Helpline. There's also crisis mental health and support lines here. And then this is not an extensive list, but I did provide about a handful of different MAiD information and resources here in Canada. I will share if anyone's interested, but Bridge C14 is the organization that I've facilitated grief groups with. Thank you very much for everything. And then also, as mentioned, there's some references that were used in the presentation as well. I'm going to actually just give me 2 seconds, and I'm going to put a couple of links here in the chat, especially for those of you who are interested in learning about MAiD and learning about the law in particular. There we go.
It is good to see a lot of interaction in the chat. Thank you so much for your participation, everyone. And thank you so much for being here. Ryan, thank you for your presentation. I will then bid everyone goodbye. I hope you have a time to answer our survey so that we can continue to show up for you on any topic that you feel supported in terms of your grief. So thanks, everyone. Good evening.
Hi, guys.
And
I just have one question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Will Ryan be giving us some access to these slides because they would be very interesting to review later?
Janet, unfortunately, we're not able to share the slides, but we could probably share in the newsletter once these are up in our YouTube channel. So all of the recorded webinars will be uploaded in our YouTube channel. So hopefully that is helpful for you.
Okay, but no slides. Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Take care of yourselves following today's session. Do something nice for yourselves.
Take care. Good night.